The lights in the ballroom were too bright. That's what Clint Eastwood thought as he sat at a round table near the back, half hidden by the centerpiece, watching younger men in sharper suits laugh louder than they needed to. It was 1992. He was 62, the kind of age where people still called you by your first name, but stopped returning your calls. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. The invitation had come late, the kind that arrives after someone else cancels. A courtesy. A legend's farewell lap. He'd spent 40 years in this town, and now it felt like he was being honored the way you honor a retiring teacher. Polite, distant, ready to move on. Across the room, a studio executive leaned back in his chair, gesturing with a tumbler of scotch, his voice carried. The problem is, audiences want energy now. They want someone who feels like tomorrow, not yesterday. Clint didn't react. He'd heard it before. Different words, same meaning. Too old, too slow, too much history. The town that built him had decided he was a relic, and relics belonged in museums, not on set. He'd just finished a film, a Western. Dark, quiet, brutal in a way that didn't apologize. It was about a man who'd done terrible things, trying to do one last good thing. It wasn't the kind of movie people were making anymore. No explosions in the first 10 minutes, no quips, just silence and dust, and the weight of a lifetime pressing down on every frame. The studio hadn't wanted it. They'd agreed to distribute it because of his name, but they didn't believe in it. He could feel that in every meeting, every note, every glance that said, "We'll humor you. Yeah, but don't expect much." The film was called Unforgiven. It would open in 6 months. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight was about shaking hands, smiling for photos, pretending the past wasn't already written. He nursed a glass of water and thought about leaving early. A younger director approached, mid-30s, riding high on a recent hit. His energy was sharp, almost frantic, like he was afraid if he stopped moving, people would stop noticing him. He sat down without asking, grinned, leaned in close. "Mr. Eastwood," he said too loud. "Huge fan. Huge. I grew up watching your stuff." Clint nodded. "Appreciate that. Listen, I wanted to ask, what's it like, watching the industry change? I mean, you've been doing this forever. Must be wild, seeing how fast everything moves now." It wasn't a question. It was a statement dressed as curiosity. Clint heard the subtext. "You're from a different time. We've moved on." He didn't answer right away. Let the silence sit. The younger man shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, unsure if he'd offended someone or just been misunderstood. "It's different," Clint said finally. "Not better or worse, just different." The director laughed a little too hard. "Yeah, totally. I mean, the old stuff is classic, don't get me wrong. But audiences now, they want spectacle. They want fast. I don't know if the slower stuff still works, Clint looked at him, really looked. Saw the fear underneath the confidence. Saw a man who needed to believe the past was obsolete, because the present was all he had. Saw himself 30 years ago hungry and terrified and convinced the only way forward was louder. Maybe, Clint said. Or maybe people are just waiting for something that feels true again." The director blinked. Didn't know what to do with that. Nodded, stood, clapped Clint on the shoulder like they were old friends, and moved on to the next table. Clint stayed, watched the room, felt the noise pressing in from all sides. Everyone trying to prove something, everyone afraid of the same thing, being forgotten. He thought about the film again, about the character he'd played. A man who'd been a killer, who'd tried to walk away, who got pulled back in not because he wanted to, but because the world wouldn't let him leave. A man who understood that violence didn't make you strong. It made you tired. The studio executives didn't understand it. They wanted heroes. They wanted redemption arcs and triumphant music and clear moral victories. They wanted the audience to leave feeling good. Clint had given them a man who succeeded and still looked broken at the end. A man who won and lost everything that mattered. A story that didn't comfort. It confronted. And the town had looked at it, looked at him and said, "We'll see." A week later, he was in a smaller room, a development meeting, pitched a new project, something quieter, character-driven, about fathers and sons and the weight of unspoken grief. The kind of story that took its time. The executive listened, polite, patient. And when Clint finished, the man smiled, leaned back, folded his hands. "I love the passion," he said, "but I think we're looking for something with a little more commercial appeal. You understand?" Clint understood. He'd been understanding for months, understanding that the town was done with him, understanding that his kind of storytelling was out of fashion, understanding that at 62, you were expected to step aside gracefully, make way for the next generation, accept your legacy, and stop trying to add to it. He left the meeting without argument, drove home through empty streets, the city lights blurring past, felt the exhaustion that comes not from working too hard, but from pushing against a door that won't open. He thought about quitting, seriously thought about it, not in a dramatic way, just stopping. There were other things he could do, other ways to spend the years he had left. The fight was starting to feel pointless, but then he thought about the film, about the man in the dust, about the weight of the story, about the silence at the end that said more than any speech ever could. He thought about the younger director, desperate to prove he belonged. Thought about the executive, hiding behind market trends and focus groups, afraid to trust his own instincts. He thought about himself decades ago being told he'd never be more than a TV actor, that he didn't have the range, that his face was too hard, his voice too quiet. He'd proved them wrong then, not by arguing, not by forcing his way through, by doing the work, by trusting the story. And maybe that was the only way forward now. Not louder, not faster, just truer. The premiere of Unforgiven was quiet. No red carpet spectacle. No massive marketing campaign. The studio had done the minimum, kept expectations low, prepared for a modest opening and a quick fade. Clint sat in the back of the theater watching the audience watch the film. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at their faces. At first, they were restless, waiting for the action to kick in, waiting for the hero to emerge. The film moved slowly, deliberately, building tension not through explosions, but through silence, through the weight of every choice, every glance, every moment of hesitation. And then something shifted. The room went still. People stopped checking their watches, stopped whispering, leaned forward. The story had them. Not because it was louder or faster or more spectacular, because it was true, because it didn't flinch. When the credits rolled, the silence held. No one moved. And then slowly the applause began. Not polite, not obligatory. Real. Clint slipped out before the lights came up. Didn't need to hear the praise. Didn't need the validation. He'd told the story he needed to tell. The rest was out of his hands. The reviews came in slowly, then faster, then all at once. Critics called it a masterpiece. Audiences showed up, kept showing up. Word spread. The quiet, dark, unfashionable Western that the studio had barely believed in became the film everyone had to see. 6 months later, Clint stood on a stage holding a small golden statue. Best Director. The room that had written him off was on its feet, applauding. The younger directors, the executives, the people who'd smiled politely and moved on, all clapping now, all celebratory, all acting like they'd known all along. He didn't gloat, didn't give a speech about proving people wrong or defying the odds. He thanked his crew, thanked the actors, kept it short, because the story had already been told. The film was the answer. The statue was just a footnote. But standing there, holding that weight in his hand, he thought about the executive who'd said audiences wanted energy. Thought about the younger director who'd asked what it was like watching the industry change. He thought about the man in the dust, broken and exhausted, who did what needed to be done and carried the cost of it alone. He thought about the difference between being loud and being heard. The applause faded. The cameras moved on. The next winner was announced. Clint walked off stage, past the noise, past the lights, into the quiet hallway behind the curtain. He set the statue down on a table, looked at it for a moment, felt nothing like triumph, just a quiet kind of relief. He'd told the truth, and the truth had been enough. A young assistant approached, nervous, excited. "Mr. Eastwood, they want you for photos." He nodded. "In a minute." The assistant hesitated, then left. Clint stood alone, the noise of the ceremony muffled behind thick walls. Somewhere out there, the town was already moving on to the next thing, the next story, the next name. But in this moment, in this quiet, he allowed himself to feel it. Not pride. Something quieter. Something harder to name. The understanding that age wasn't the enemy. Fear was. And the only way to beat fear was to stop fighting it and start trusting the story. He picked up the statue, felt the weight, thought about all the years behind him, all the noise, all the doubt. And then he thought about the film, about the man who walked away at the end. Not victorious, not defeated. I just finished. Carrying the weight, living with it. Clint walked back toward the lights, toward the photos and the handshakes and the people who would forget this night by morning. But the story would remain, quiet, true, unforgiving, and that, he thought, was all that ever really mattered.